Buddy, glad to see you. Glad you're not standing out in the rain or risking life and limb right now. Yeah, you get to be in a warm, dry place. These two previous sessions have gone really, really well. I think you're going to enjoy this presentation. I hope it'll be useful to you. I'm going to introduce you to my friend, Chaplain Kenneth Kuhn, whose background with emergency services began 24 years ago when he became the chaplain for the Fayetteville Fire Department. Today he serves as the CIT chaplain for the Peachtree City Police and is regularly called upon by the Sheriff's Office to assist veterans in crisis. Ken is the recipient of the 2016 nonprofit Trinity Awards, Emergency Responder of the Year for his work in conducting more than 600 successful suicide interventions and training more than 7,200 caregivers across the nation in his role as the Executive Director of Armed Forces Mission. Ken is a trainer for the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association, as well as a master trainer of suicide intervention in the U.S. Army Reserve. Ken holds a doctorate in counseling and completed units in clinical pastoral education at Georgia Baptist Hospital and Fayette, Piedmont. He is a member of the Georgia Chiefs of Police Association and the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Ken's also a brother and a friend to me and to our department, and a partner in ministry with us. And so would you guys welcome Ken as he comes?
Well, good afternoon. I've got the 3 o'clock crowd, man. That is the toughest group, isn't it? Always. Doesn't matter who's in it. It's just the time of the day. 3 o'clock. It's like Snickers time, right? Time for a Snickers. But I do want to welcome you here. This workshop is called One Oops Away. And I'm not going to explain that any further than just to say you'll understand why in just a little bit, okay? So One Oops Away is the name of the workshop. It's part of the No More Suicide campaign, which is a campaign of Armed Forces Mission that we've been doing since 2012. And began initially as a goal to turn the tide on suicide for veterans. We've got 12,000 veterans in this community. Any veterans in here? Okay, so we got a few. And 12,000 veterans in this community. And then it expanded beyond that to reach anybody, because I'm a soldier, and you know the soldier's creed is we serve the people of the United States of America, not just ourselves. So we expanded that definition of no more suicide to everybody, and now we train everybody that we can to save everybody that they can in order to turn the tide on suicide. So thank you for being here. I know that some of you are here. I can just tell by looking at you. I know that some of you are here because you were voluntold to be here, right? But hopefully by the end of the day, you can give me 2 thumbs up that you're glad that you came to this workshop, because truly it is our goal to share with you some things that will hopefully help you in the work that you do. So let's jump right in. Some of y'all might remember the picture here on the left. Any of y'all worked that one? April 23 years ago. You remember that one, don't you? Yeah. I was actually at the Fayetteville. I was at the Fayetteville. What was it? What's the restaurant? I just lost a blank. No, I was in McDonald's. I'm sorry. I was actually in the McDonald's. I've got 4 boys. My 2 oldest were born at that point. Oldest is 26 now. I think this happened 23 years ago. I was actually in the McDonald's when that car ran across the Wendy's, hit the tanker, started a little fire right there under the hood. A lady screamed in the McDonald's. I looked out, saw the car on fire, told my wife, get the kids, get in the car, get away from here as fast as you can. Ran over to right there in the middle of the street, couldn't get any closer. The car was already starting to be engulfed, and the guy in the car was dead. Bottom line, I don't remember, somebody said he had a seizure or something like that. I don't remember what the details were, but I do know one of my friends who's on our board of directors was with the Sheriff's Office at that time. He showed up as well. He thought that was his mother's car. That was interesting. He had a moment of, whoa, whose car is this? So that was an interesting day. And it took, I think they were on the scene about 12 hours, isn't it? Yeah, because it was a long day for the whole county, plus Jonesboro, I think, showed up. Clayton County was here, and maybe some folks from the Atlanta airport were here as well. I can't remember. But interesting day. And I think some of the gas went down into the manholes and was blowing manholes up across the street. So very interesting. So that's how I got involved. I put together a Fireman's Appreciation Day, and I don't know if you remember that part, but we got together in the parking lot at Hudson Plaza, and I got the choir from high school to come and sing some patriotic songs, and the chief over there, I think it was Chief Scottman, who was a volunteer. Do you remember Chief Scottman? I think it was Chief Scottman. Carl Chapman, that's it. That's right. Carl said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "Because I'm an Army chaplain and appreciate what you guys do." He said, "Are you full-time Army?" I said, "No, I'm reserve." He said, "Well, then you can work with us." And so that's what I did. And the last fire I fought with them was actually on White Road. Some of y'all might remember the nursery that got caught on fire, the daycare center, the day after the lady was arrested for doing drugs. Lo and behold, the place catches on fire. That's not too obvious, is it? And that was the first time I actually had the opportunity to work interior on a fire, because we got there before the county did. I think both county and city showed up. What do you do? Flip a coin to see who gets to go inside or whatever. But so I went inside and they put a bottle on me and I sucked it down in about 3 minutes and came out and just started praying for you guys. So I'll just stick to praying for people. I don't need to fight the fires. I'll just pray for you. Who knows what this is right here? Gatlinburg, yeah. Anybody go to Gatlinburg to help with that one? That was in November. I share this with you because me and my wife were up there this past weekend. And it's pretty sad. 16,000 acres that were destroyed. And 2,400 buildings either destroyed or smoke damaged. I think it ended up being close to $1 billion worth of damage. And so that was tough. I had an opportunity to talk to some of the firemen that were on that particular scene, and one of them, probably 27 years old, he's just talking about how surreal it was to be surrounded by all that fire, and it was scary, you know. I know the hotel that we stayed in, they were empty for about 2 weeks after that. People couldn't come or go for that period of time. Anybody know what that might be a picture of? That top right. That's actually the top of Grady there, so it's the life flight for Grady. It's not the actual life flight that my son took. I didn't have the thought to take a picture of my son going into Grady, but he was life flighted to Grady back about 7 years ago, and ended up making the front page of the Coweta Times Herald that day. It's not the way you want your son to make the front page. But he was involved in a fire, burned him 90% of his arms and half of his face, and had to be life flighted to Grady. And we ended up at the Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, thanks to the Shriners. And that's just an incredible burn center there for children. Thank God for that. But that's kind of my experiences. I wanted to share that with you. The top right one there was kind of the culmination of several traumatic events that happened in my life, and was probably the one that put me over the edge, because I was the one at home when my son got hurt. My wife was at the grocery store, so he got hurt on my watch. And some of you may know what that's like. I work with soldiers all the time that were in leadership positions, and someone got hurt on their watch, or someone got killed on their watch. And they come home, and it's called survivor's remorse when that happens. And they're having to work through that. And you guys are in a profession where there's a high risk factor for getting hurt, isn't it? And so you got to deal with that reality that somebody might get hurt on your watch. How do you deal with that? And for me, I had never had a suicidal thought in my life. But here, my son got hurt. I didn't have a job at the time. I'd left a church. I didn't have a job. I'd moved back into our old home. Didn't have insurance. The life flight alone was $22,000. Had to file for bankruptcy, medical bankruptcy, to protect my assets, and I started spiraling down mentally and emotionally and spiritually and every other way. And I'd lay in bed at night looking at the terms of an insurance policy that I knew would pay off because the exclusion clause had expired. And I knew that it would pay my wife a substantial amount of money if I died by any reason. So that was my beginnings of moving into this thought of suicide, the subject that we're talking about today. And I'll share a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. Our objectives today. What we want to do is we want to renew our personal awareness. Now, I know that you guys are already aware. Your awareness level is probably higher than the average person here in the county. I got that. And, you know, even in what I do when I'm in the Army, wearing my green uniform, we do suicide interventions all the time, training. I had a soldier one time say, "Why do we have to do these all the time?" Well, the goal is to reduce suicides. That's why we do it. And I'll show you some stats here in a minute on why I believe that training does, in fact, change the dynamic. We do want to sharpen our intervention skills. How many of y'all have ever had a suicide intervention workshop? Same as the other classes. I think in the second class we did have one person, and the reason being is because he was prior military. And nowadays, anybody that's currently been in the military in recent years has to have suicide intervention training in all the branches. The third bullet that we want to do is we want to strengthen community and EMS culture. And if we're going to strengthen the community, I think that the way we do that is first of all by strengthening the culture right here, the ones in uniform, whether it's law enforcement, emergency services, fire, whatever the case may be. That's where we begin to strengthen the culture. I have a personal goal of seeing this town really transformed. I'll share that more in detail here in just a little bit, but I think that we can do it. I really do believe that we can do it. Anybody read EMS World? Y'all familiar with that? Okay. Recent article, it's 2 years old now, 3 years old. John Erich, he's a fireman, wrote an article. He raised the question, is it possible to build skills and bolster defenses to prevent post-incident stress problems from occurring? That's the question that he raised. First of all, are you guys in a profession that might subject you to post-incident stress problems? Yeah, absolutely. We are awake this morning, right? This afternoon. Absolutely. You are, without question. So, is it possible to build skills? I think that it is. And we're going to look at that in further detail in just a minute. My personal goal for this community is in the next 5 years, and I've put this out there, I am standing on this, this is my mantra, I guess you could say, or my manifesto. I want to see this county, this community that I love dearly, I want us to see a zero suicide rate, not only for 1 year, but sustained going into the future within the next 5 years. You say, Ken, I don't think that's possible. How can we possibly have a zero suicide rate? I think we can do it, but we can't do it if we don't commit to it. You can't do what you don't commit to. I think we can. And the reason I think we can is because when I went back into the military back in 2010, 7 years ago, from 2010 to 2015, I was in the 4th Brigade headquartered in Decatur, Georgia. We had soldiers in 10 states. My commander gave me his intent. And his intent was to see suicide in our brigade covering 10 states reduced to 0. And I said, yes, sir, that's what we'll do. And that's what we did. And now the deputy that took over my position so that I could move to a 2-star command, he has been doing the same thing for the past 2 years. So in this brigade, for the past 7 years, in a state that covers soldiers in 10 states, we have been able to maintain 0 suicide in that brigade. As a result, I do now work for a 2-star who is also the chief of police for Birmingham, Alabama. And General Roper he's wrapped up in suicide. He's had law enforcement personnel taking their life. And in the 80th Training Command in 2015, the rate of suicide when I entered that command was 575% higher than the general public. We have soldiers in 40 states. That rate of suicide is astronomical. I don't know how that hits you, but that's crazy. 575% higher than the general public. So our goal there is to do what we did before and to reduce the rate of suicide to 0. I think we can do it, but it's going to take a lot of effort from a lot of people working together to make it happen. So here's something that we can tell you. 2012, we had not done any training and intervention in this community. The suicide rate in Fayette County was just a little bit less than the national average. It was about 10 per 100,000. We got 110,000 people in this community. The national rate is 12 to 13 per 100,000 people. In 2013, we trained 300 people in this community. I did about 5 or 6 interventions myself that year. My wife did some, and the people that we trained did some. We don't know of any other variable that changed in 2013. But what we do know is that 2013, the suicide rate dropped 50% to a 20-year low. That's pretty phenomenal. 2013, the end of 2013, I began traveling more. And I was not only working for my brigade, but I started doing more stuff for the division, training officers in other locations, military personnel, working with the 101st Airborne, working with the 99th Regional Support Command in New Jersey, and I totally skipped away from Fayette County in 2014. 2014 and 15, I'm doing 50,000 miles a year on Delta Airline. Didn't even think about Fayette County. No training. And you see that the suicide rate started creeping back up. In 2015, it was actually 20% higher than the national average. It was epidemic in 2015. Some of you in this room probably got called on those suicide calls. I don't know. 2015 was not a good year in this county. In 2016, I was walking into the Longhorns in Peachtree City on January 13th last year, and I got a call from Chief Moon at the Peachtree City Police Department. Where are you at? I said, Longhorns, fixing to eat. Turn around, 75 yards away, down on the hill, 54 and 74, veteran had taken his life during rush hour. That was tough for me because I was only 75 yards away when that veteran died. Think about something for a minute. I was about 50 yards away from my son when he was hurt and burned on 90% of his arms and half of his body. I was 75 yards away from that veteran when he took his life. That was tough. It made me have flashbacks to the thoughts that I was having when my son got hurt. I had never had a suicidal thought in my life until my son got hurt. The reason that I went back in the military in 2010 was not necessarily to serve my country. It was in hopes that I would be deployed and that the enemy would kill me, because I wasn't going to kill myself. I was going to let the enemy do it. Now, those of you who have been in the military, I think you raised your hand. You know that you don't tell the recruiter, hey, I'm thinking about suicide. Y'all got a place for me. You don't get in the military when you do that. And so everything that I believed in, my ethics, my morals, everything was beginning to slip down because of the mental anguish that I was under. I was planning to go in and work with the 48th Brigade. They were planning to deploy with the Georgia National Guard. That's what I wanted to do. And my paperwork got lost. And it was another year before I actually got into the military again and was sworn in. It was exactly a year. Well, the 48th had already gotten them a new chaplain, and they'd already deployed. They were gone. They said, we've got a position for you. It's in the Army Reserve. You can take that if you want it. But if you don't want this one, we can't help you because you're about to be too old. And I don't know if another spot will open up. So I sat down with Frank Eubanks, Colonel in Decatur, Georgia, at the 4th Brigade. And the first words out of his mouth, I kid you not, the first words out of his mouth, he said, Chaplain, if you decide to take this job, I need for you to focus on suicide. And I'm like, okay, we can do that. He didn't have any idea that I'd been thinking about suicide. But I ended up going to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And you have to understand, I have a doctorate in counseling, but I got this much training in suicide intervention as a counselor. Licensed professional counselors will tell you the same thing. They get this much training in suicide intervention. Seminary students who become pastors, they get zero training. And so I've had pastors in this community that call me all the time because they're not sure what to do. And so just in the next 2 hours, you're going to get more training than most pastors and licensed professional counselors get in suicide intervention. But I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for training. The Army's the one that trained me in suicide intervention. My oldest son was in the Air Force. He had just deployed, come back home. He's in California, and now he's at Charleston Air Force Base, 90 miles away. Anybody know where Charleston Air Force Base is at? There's a base there, and there's also a ship that sits in the harbor. It's called the USS Yorktown. Anybody ever toured that? The USS Yorktown. I called my son and said, we're coming down to tour the USS Yorktown. I hadn't seen him in a year. So we're walking around this boat, and McCrae says, Dad, you're not working out anymore. He knew that I loved to work out. Here's a sign, folks. If somebody is not doing what they used to love doing, and they're not doing it anymore, that's a sign that maybe there's something going on. We need to dig down and see what's going on. McCrae had been trained in the Air Force in suicide intervention. He's 19 years old. It doesn't take a lot to raise our level of awareness, folks. What I'm saying to you is, we're walking around this ship, and he's saying, Dad, you're not working out anymore. What's going on? And he keeps talking to me. He knew what was going on with my situation with the bills. He knew how I felt about Chad getting hurt. He knew how that tore me up. And finally, he pulls me over to the side, and he looks me in the eye and says, Dad, are you thinking about suicide? My son is the one that saved my life. I got on that transport bus going back to Fort Jackson, 90 miles away. Next morning, I'm getting ready for PT.